Hello. Oh, oh, okay. Oh, whoa. That looks really fun. Okay, let me show you. Um, Ooh, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Fun. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about a very interesting topic, fascinating, very substantial. We're gonna be talking about MDMA, the phenomenology, the um, psychological and emotional effects that it has, and the potential that it has for all of us as a key piece of the puzzle. Not a perfect thing, actually. I want to actually say, yeah, like a disclaimer. I mean, like MDMA is cardiotoxic. You can develop heart disease if you take a lot of MDMA. It's probably neurotoxic. I mean, people tend to push back against that. But if you use MDMA a lot, it's very common for people to essentially develop depersonalization, derealization, depression, anxiety, and the world just feels a little bit less friendly. So I do think it is actually damaging, and you really should take very seriously. I mean, it's not very damaging. I would say that the benefits can outweigh the costs in some circumstances. So the model of kind of like, should you take MDMA ever? I would say, hold in your mind, you will have, let's say, like 5 occasions. And if you only use it like 5 times in your life, the long-term impact will be very, very mild, very, very mild. Probably imperceptible, clinically insignificant. But those 5 sessions could do really important things and show you possibilities and catalyze transformations. Even though it has kind of this air of kind of like youth and kind of like lack of seriousness, right? But no, 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 no. MDMA is very, very significant. I promise. I promise. Okay, so let's get into it. The quality of the day. This is actually it's almost kind of like a dessert, to be honest. It is an alloy of walnut milk and oat milk in the right proportions, so you maximize creaminess while maintaining the sweetness, and it's very nice. It's almost like cake. I don't know. It's probably not super healthy. I'm sure it's full of carbohydrates, but so nice, so nice. Okay, so MDMA. First of all, let's develop a little bit of an intuition. Um, when you open up your heart in meditation, you become very still and receptive for the universe. There is a sense in which you're kind of dropping layers of conditioning, stress patterns that modify your behavior and create the sense of your ego. That, in meditation can sort of like slowly unwind. And at the core, the fascinating thing is that we actually find universal, very beautiful drives. And the bad things that we do with all of this conditioning, by and large, actually underneath have some love or kind of a reaction to not having love. And so when you get to kind of this core in meditation, it becomes really clear that really, what you deeply desire is liberation and love for everybody. And MDMA does this very efficiently and very fast. Kind of like allows you to see all of these layers and get to the core and open your heart. I know it sounds silly, but it's true. It's true. This is a true thing. And okay, from a Buddhist perspective, what is the thing that causes us to act in unhelpful, unskillful ways? 3 poisons. You could say greed, hatred, delusion. The state that you get to, let's say, 120 milligrams, 130 milligrams of MDMA, depending on body weight and reaction. There's a lot of genetic variability, I assume, for how people react. But in that state, usually it's pretty clear how greed and delusion and hatred actually kind of like are not your true essence and have kind of like get mixed up in the layers of your soul, so to speak. Um, so this is kind of like some very basic intuitions, and I think they point to something very real. They point to something very important. But we can go deeper. We can analyze the phenomenology of MDMA and go so much deeper, and hopefully be able to use the insights and generalize them and apply them elsewhere without MDMA, or drugs in general. Maybe there's like just completely different ways of getting there. I am sure with meditation it is possible, but yeah, for the average person, it's difficult, right? I suspect there are ways, there's technologies, techniques to be discovered if we figure out intellectually, emotionally, and with a desire to help others how this works. So what I'm going to say today is, very speculative, okay? It's very speculative, but I've thought a lot about this. I really have. And I'm very excited to share some of these ideas and insights. Okay. So yeah, first of all, I mean, there's two concepts I think I've been thinking a lot about. One is like fear, and the other one is reactance. So first of all, reactance is the emotional state that arises when you perceive that somebody or something is restricting your freedom, your capacity to explore and move. And oftentimes when you get that emotion, immediately and reactively, you kind of want to do the opposite of what the other person said, right? It's like, hey, you can't exit the house. Well, not only I'm going to go out very far. You take it to kind of the other level because you want to kind of like fight the restriction. And I would say that, hey, if we have the ability to actually talk like adults, get rid a little bit of kind of these like strong layers of conditioning and ego architecture, you don't really need reactance. And you realize that reactance actually predicates on a wrong model of how emotions and social dynamics work that is self-serving, as it turns out. So intuitively, I suspect, personally also I feel this, when I experience reactance, it almost feels kind of there's like a Newtonian thing going on. For every action, there's a reaction. And you just feel like, yeah, no, you have to do that, obviously. It's just part of nature. And it will get back to where it really should be, right? But, let me take... but, here's the thing. Emotions don't work that way. They're non-Newtonian. They're like kind of the cornstarch and water. You push hard and actually gets harder. And there's something that's kind of like liquidy. If you approach it with a strong attack, actually, it can break and becomes brittle and it's very unpleasant and shears. And then the person to which you express the reactance will have that in their field of consciousness. And then if they have unhelpful attitudes, they might seek revenge, right? And the thing escalates and, okay, so, but the feeling of reactance gives you the sense that, no, this is not how it works. It's more kind of like billiard balls. But no, it's not like that. The field of consciousness is not Newtonian. It's a non-Newtonian medium. And so chill out, calm down. It's important. Let's not, create these like sheer patterns and stress the field. And apologies if I do it. I mean, not my intention. But it happens. And I'm always open to critical, constructive criticism. So that is one component. The other one is fear. So fear phenomenologically is something along the lines of the sense of the weakening of the foundation of a lot of what you have constructed in your energetic field. I mean, it's kind of like realizing that, hey, this big building actually has just a few, poles that is actually sustaining it. And realizing, oh my God, they know this. I'm in danger. And so you do all sorts of things, either to distract from the weakness or emphasize the strength, or just pretend it's not there. There's all sorts of things that happen, but it's not a very constructive state to be in if you actually want to see a situation more clearly and allow kind of like all of your sub-agents to look at it carefully. Because with fear, it blocks a lot of movements. I mean, anything that you feel has a capacity to kind of like actually mess with the foundation of your architecture. You're gonna be in denial. You're gonna be afraid of it. You're gonna push away information that may target it in some way. So MDMA drastically for a period of, let's say, like 90 minutes or even 3 hours, depending on the dose, the reaction, and the tolerance and so on. But for a little while, legitimately, you have just so much less reactance and so much less fear. And so you can actually perceive a situation without these two components, influencing it and blocking perspectives. And when that is down, yeah, you can see in a more, I would say, not impersonal, also not like third-person perspective, because it's not dissociative or psychedelic in that way, but it's in a way where the distortions of the ego architecture don't get in the way of perceiving the situation. And oh, this is so important. This is so important, right? If we could actually replicate that, like very meaningful, real conversations can happen, and hopefully we can actually work as a team. Okay, team humanity. Sure, let's do that. Okay, so that's another perspective. The next one is, well, so here's the thing. At QRI, we actually, very much think that we can improve scales for understanding how different states of consciousness work. So here's an embarrassing fact, and I'm sorry to say this is embarrassing, secondhand embarrassment. I am sorry, because the people who did this are really trying, but it's very silly and it's a waste of resources. I'm sorry. Which is, recently, there was a study in Europe where they were essentially seeing like, hey, does MDMA change the quality of LSD? And what they did was, okay, like, administer like 100 milligrams of MDMA in one condition, LSD and MDMA, and just LSD in the other. They did it poorly because they, usually if you candy flip, I have a video about candy flipping. It's a very interesting thing. Now I'm just gonna focus on MDMA. But when you candy flip, the timing is very important. If you actually take both substances at once, what happens, it's overwhelming, and you can be very nauseous. It's, there's a lot of negative kind of overwhelming feelings. If you line up the come up of both, you really shouldn't do that. Either take MDMA in a low dose like before to kind of like soften and open you up for a psychedelic experience. Not a lot, so that you don't have a big calm down while you're on LSD or something like that. Or take it in the most, classic way, which is like something like 3 or 4 hours afterwards. And that will, change the quality of the LSD. And it's very obvious. It's very obvious, the changes. And so what happened in these studies, they administered, standard questionnaires about, okay, how you're feeling, things like the mystical experiences questionnaire. And if you apply those scales, you're not really measuring what's interesting about this state. There is one exception, in science. I'm deeply grateful, which is Matthew Baggott, because he actually, has done serious academic, scientific research on MDMA. And what he argues is that the psychological scale that is most adequate to kind of like capture what is going on, in what way MDMA is different than amphetamines, for example, is this construct of authenticity. And authenticity, I know it's, if it can be painful to actually hear somebody like, oh, I'm becoming more authentic recently. Because, if you have a craving for validation and you hear that and you think like, oh, this narcissist, he thinks authentic. That's like, come on, he's a liar, he cheats, but no. There is a there, my friends. There really is. There really is this construct of authenticity that can reorient priorities, perspectives in your life. And, it has like things such as like self-compassion, not self-admiration, not like kind of like, poofing up your ego, but no. It's kind of like cutting through those layers, getting to the core, and realize, hey, this very, spiritual, deep, soul-like field of love has always been inside and has, in some sense, suffered your own criticisms, your own hatred, delusions, and pushed it around with greed and not in a judgmental way. It's just what happens. We're built that way, and so an MDMA is something like you were just a child when this happened. You had no resources. You had no way of knowing how to keep this. Okay, this is a bit of a cartoon, actually. It's way more complicated. But the point is that to actually have genuine, authentic self-compassion, it is about that. It is not about, I'm such a great X, programmer, painter, speaker, researcher, whatever it is not that. It really isn't. It is more to the core and the feeling of safety and beauty that exists at the center, and that is the sort of thing that sparks authenticity. Also, meditation can absolutely do this. It's just that MDMA can be a spark. Like if you're really, really kind of like lots of layers, very, very stuck and compressed, stressed, sheared, MDMA, you can even think of it as kind of like a loan from some higher realm where they have figured out how to always love. And sure, there's going to be a calm down, and sure, it is somewhat damaging, but if you use that very, very, very consciously and effectively, it can do important things, really important things. And so, take the concept of authenticity seriously. Okay, but at QRI, we want to go deeper, right? Like authenticity in some sense is actually kind of like a behavioral, functional description of what is going on. We want kind of like a structural, at QRI, this concept actually comes from Mike Johnson, the co-founder of QRI. In Principia Qualia, he talks about valence structuralism. That's such an influential idea for me, which is the idea that the thing that makes an experience feel good or bad has to do with the structure of the experience. Actually the mathematical structure of it. More recently, I've become, very interested in understanding kind of like how do we apply the lens of valence structuralism to topological structures, and that's so interesting. That's what I'm thinking in the shower and things like that. But so let me say a little bit about kind of how MDMA could be approached from this perspective. So one thing is MDMA allows you to kind of like, when you encounter a blockage, something that is blocking your thinking, some trauma, rather than just experiencing it for a moment and becoming aware of it, and then like it recedes into the background, the right combination that MDMA has, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and I suspect, also recently Mike Johnson, wrote a very interesting article about vaso competition, or competition with blood vessels, and I think there's really something there. Also have been thinking a lot about that. So one of the things is, it feels like, okay, let's not say blood. I don't know if it's blood. Let's use something more agnostic and woo to scare people who are not interested in these. Let's say life energy or something like that. So life energy can circulate and kind of like keep thinking and keep animating and maintaining the awareness on the blockage. And just different components of your mind will try to see, how can I be helpful to undo that blockage? And it has a lot to do, which is actually maintaining it rather than just, it's like a flicker. My field is kind of like rigid and it's unpleasant there. It's like, no, just keep it there. A sea of acceptance and love and equanimity, kind of like interacting with it and finding, what shape can actually undo and unravel the problem there. So that's one of the things. The other one is so tracers. I will make a video more about tracers. They are very significant. I think they're computationally really important. For why, for example, you can think new things on LSD, DMT, and so on. Okay, so typical psychedelics, I think they cause a lot of sensory low-level tracers, like visual tracers, tactile tracers, auditory tracers, even conceptual tracers. Like things just linger linger for longer. So, but MDMA is not exactly a psychedelic in that sense, okay? But it does cause a type of tracer. And guess what? There is another drug, weed, THC. It's kind of like that. It also causes a different type of tracer. I would say weed actually causes something like a short-term memory or working memory tracer. Because like you're getting into the car, and then you're getting into the car, and then like you're putting your seatbelt. You're getting into the car, you're putting your seatbelt, your seatbelt. You're putting your seat. Like kind of like if you're really high on weed, you know, kind of like actions are kind of like not stitched together properly, and kind of yeah. So that's like working memory tracers rather than like low-level sensory tracers. Guess what? I think MDMA causes emotional tracers. So the emotions linger and they can interact with each other. And you have emotional depth. In some sense, it is kind of the opposite of what I suspect, you know, SSRIs do. I have never taken an SSRI. I don't intend to. I think it probably might be damaging to just take it, just one pill. I've heard people who had gotten hurt from just taking one pill of an SSRI, like Prozac. Is rare. Yeah, usually one pill is not gonna. It's gonna be kind of like 5-HTP or something like that. Okay, yeah, you raise serotonin, a little bit of nausea and things like that. It's probably not gonna alter your brain. But some people, one pill, and they have sexual dysfunction for the rest of their lives. I have encountered people to whom that happened. So it's scary. I mean, yeah, SSRIs is nothing to be casual about. Also, MDMA is nothing to be casual about, or any of the substances I talk about. Okay, not even alcohol. Okay, I'm getting distracted and off track, but circumstantial speech. Okay, so emotional tracers, emotional depth. So what happens with SSRIs is something like it reduces the depth of emotion. The emotions actually last less. It's kind of the emotion just doesn't build up. Whereas MDMA allows a long, deep emotional field. And so it allows multiple emotions to be together in superposition, interacting, you know, phase locking, in resonance, helping each other out. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's like, why? How? Emotional tracers. Okay. So I think this is very, very significant. And I will say a lot more about tracers in the future. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is looking at MDMA through the lens of psychedelic thermodynamics. I have like a presentation about psychedelic thermodynamics. Unfortunately, I haven't really had kind of the time and presence of mind to really describe it in writing in full. I really have to. I think also we're onto something with psychedelic thermodynamics. So in general, one concept is that let's say like DMT, I think that it energizes your visual cortex, your visual system at a particular frequency, something like 30 hertz, really energizes it. What you experience on DMT are essentially cross-frequency coupling and energization of the natural harmonics of the visual cortex, and you get all kinds of nonlinear interactions as a consequence. But then also, you know, that energy dissipates through the rest of the nervous system. You know, it finds energy sinks. You know, sometimes on DMT is like, oh my gosh, why am I with my kidney? Like I can feel my kidney, or I can feel my my heart, or I can feel my whole arm kind of like is tessellated. And okay, so those would be kind of like energy sinks. It's kind of like, oh, it's finding like radiators, you know, intelligently. I mean, something like slime, a mold, or a you know, kind of like an electron that is searching all possibilities, and then like it collapses in the way that it can move in a way. Okay, this is super a cartoon and simplified. DMT is kind of like that, you know, it's exploring all of these possibilities and finding energy sinks. And then it's like, oh, okay, your arm is kind of like screwed. I'm going to use that, and you can radiate out the energy. And okay, so that's like psychedelic thermodynamics. The point is that there is like a source of energy with a particular texture. And the texture is also very important, you know, like the wave form, the envelope, as they call it. For musicians and people into signal processing, you know, the attack, decay, sustained release. You know, DMT has a very sharp, very clear, mathematical, you know, like Wolfram Alpha, but for qualia. All sorts of cellular automata and things like that. Yeah, very precise, very precise. And I think that has to do with the texture. You know, the metronome is just very crisp, very crisp. MDMA is a whole other ball game, you know, and different country, different universe. So I think that if you know from the lens of psychedelic thermodynamics, I think what MDMA is primarily doing is finding one way in which most of your nervous system can resonate in the same way. This is also something that Mike Johnson was thinking about, I think, like around in 2019. We had conversations about this. I want to make sure he's acknowledged in all of the insights, and in general too, you know. If you feel like I've stolen your insight or something like that, you know, write it, give me a direct message, and if it's true, I'll apologize. Okay, no big deal, no big deal. But yeah, no, we were talking about these, the way in which all of the nervous system, you know, may actually find one way to vibrate in the same way. Octopi, you know, over there, like the octopi. Octopi respond to MDMA by becoming very cuddly. Okay, so MDMA's effect on the nervous system seems to be tapping into something really fundamental of how neurons work. And it might be that it makes them actually spike in a slightly different way, with a slightly different rhythm, where the attack is actually softened, and the kind of like natural resonant frequencies of the entire system end up being something somewhat lower, which is the frequency approximately of nystagmus, which is like when your eyes vibrate. So Stephen Lehar, for example, in his amazing book, The Grand Illusion, he talks about like, yeah, how like in his perspective, the reason MDMA feels so good is because it actually makes you vibrate not only your eyes, but kind of like more generally throughout your nervous system. And that kind of like adds these like creamy, soft, kind of like blending quality to the rest of the experience. So rather than these like crisp patterns on LSD, you get these like little vibration. It works kind of like a low pass filter. It's amazing. I mean, you can analyze this from the point of view of signal processing, except that we're talking about like the computations that happen when you vibrate a field in different ways. Okay, it's a very different way of thinking about computation, about consciousness. I think it's very generative. And I think, yes, MDMA produces this kind of like metronome, and that allows the whole system to essentially have like one common currency through which they can phase lock and interact. So it's kind of like, hey, there's like parts of you that are kind of like really messy and gnarly. I'm going to come back to the concept of gnarly. And on MDMA, with this like common currency of that particular vibration, it can talk and phase lock with other components. Again, you know, I'm not like personalizing these components. I mean, we can see it through the lens of internal family systems or something like that. I'm not going to get into that, partly because I'm not an expert in it. But I really appreciate the community who is very into it. It's fascinating. Thank you. But it is something like all of these other parts, you know, there are different topological structures, really, if you pay attention to the structure of the field, become kind of like at the service of these like very messy or contracted or complex pattern that is keeping you in a holding position and preventing you to actually exercise the full freedom of your musculature. And so, you know, and you know, in topology, oftentimes they're like inverse, you know, like a saddle has kind of like an anti-saddle, it has like a vortex. When you, in a two-dimensional vector field, when they collide, they actually, that special topological points cancel each other out, and then you get a smooth field. So an MDMA is very similar, except in 3D, maybe 4D. Yeah, we really need mathematicians, very good mathematicians dedicated to, yeah, let's figure this out, okay? Guys, let's figure this out. We have the ability, we have the time. Let's do it. Okay, so this undoing of this kind of like pattern of stress and complex topology, it can cancel out, and then the field, for once in your life, can actually become smooth and the energy travel smoothly. You know, these symmetries also are kind of like very common on like DMT or something like that. These are the wallpaper symmetry groups. On MDMA, that actually can happen to your field, but it's suboptimal. Like all of these are actually they still have a knot. That's actually a crazy thing. Like from a topological perspective, you can think of these as, yeah, kind of like little manifolds, particularly structured way, so that like it looks like there's like a mirror. It has to do with like all of the paths in which you can get back to yourself. But they're still very crisp and clean. I mean, like living in one of these configurations for a 4D field is fine. It's fine. It's a heaven realm, very beautiful. But you can go deeper. you can actually undo that knot as well and go into the kind of like a more fully unconditioned state. And again, I'm not an expert on this. I consider myself an advanced beginner meditator. I'm not even intermediate meditator. I'm just, I just spend so much time with my verbal modules and mathematical intuitions to think about this and try to share my speculative ideas. Hopefully they're helpful. Okay, so that is another thing that happens. Next, self-organizing principles. Ooh, this is something I've talked about a lot as well. You can look in, I think like literally the video on qualia computing on YouTube as well. Well, you can hear it, of course, in Spotify and others. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, Corky Roy, with the help for all of that. So, self-organizing principle is kind of like choose the rules of your cellular automata and see what happens. Okay, so the type of self-organizing principles that MDMA pushes you towards tend to be things such as, because these like very soft, gentle, beautiful, creamy metronome that is in all of your nervous system, it's kind of like holding with love some messed up pattern and allowing it to undo itself. That is actually a type of self-organizing principle. It's like all over the place, but like targeted, it actually has very profound effects. In fact, if you're alone or with a loved one and you take MDMA, even if, you're just doing it for fun or intimacy or whatever, it's very likely actually that you will realize like, oh, actually I do have some traumas. I do have like some knots. I do have some weird things. And because you're feeling so good and so capable of actually dealing with these, oftentimes, yeah, you will open up to like, do I want to deal with this trauma right now? Maybe, because I am capable of it. And then you bring it and the shaking, holding it with love, not shaking, let's say the gentle, loving, spiritual vibration allow us to undo. And well, here's an example. I mean, let's say a particular traumatic or relationship structure in your energy field has, let's say, kind of like a knotted structure like this. LSD might actually kind of like illuminate this. And it's like, whoa, and you can like compound it and do interesting things with it. MDMA, you will see this and it's like, oh, I'm sorry you feel this way. And you don't really need that much intelligence to kind of like slowly, just gently, like what you do. Well, okay, this is too sticky. Not even a good prop for this, but roughly speaking, kind of like shaking these, there's like algorithms for like undoing knots that use repulsion. Something very similar to that. It's like every part of these knots is kind of like a little bit, adding a little bit of repulsion. And eventually, yeah, it undoes itself. And when this happens, yes, there is some loss of information, some loss. I mean, not really. I do suspect like actually it's holographically encoded, and because you remember, you're very, very present when this happens, you will remember, at least subconsciously, some part of you will really understand what you did to really help that, and hopefully will generalize it and use it in other occasions. But in terms of kind of like accessibility or like presence or the way in which it is influencing it, because you undid this knot, your attention field lines will be more free and more Euclidean and more capable of seeing things without the lens of the ego architecture that has been constructed due to this trauma. So self-organizing principles, to wrap up that concept, it would be something like, it is about shaking in a very soft way. Okay, so the next one is the concept of hardness. And I think Silver in Twitter, who's a friend, and I enjoy his online presence. He's fun, and he takes the meditation seriously and really understands a lot of QRI stuff. Like he was encouraging me to do something like, oh, let's do a personality factors based on QRI ideas, and I think that's lovely, and I will probably invest a little bit in that. And one of them is kind of like, what is your degree of hardness? The overall, how hard, Mohs scale, I think, like it's like the hardness scale for minerals. Like diamond is like a 10. Chalk is like 0.5 or something. if you put like chalk next to a diamond, or like you put like another rock that you think is very hard next to a diamond, you can scratch it and the diamond doesn't get scratched, right? But the diamond is very brittle, right? Like you let it fall on the floor and it may actually break, right? So that is the state of some parts of our energetic structure that that some people really have a problem with. So these knot, let's say for a typical person, may actually be kind of like soft and squishy. Somebody who's like really up there in the hardness scale, let's say with a personality disorder, let's say sociopathy, narcissism, or something like that, clinical, in a very non-judgmental way. It's like, hey, like this happens to humans, unfortunately, and that we're trying to figure out how to help. So the hardness there will make it so that if the gap of the hardness is too large, there's just no way to reach them from the point of view of kind of like a more soft and malleable and open personality, right? What happens, for example, with narcissism, as I understand it, is very speculative as well. They have like actually a very fragile ego. It's kind of like these like little tubes of like a very fragile but very hard mineral, and they're kind of like intermeshed in a way that like if you touch it, you can actually break it. It's like, and that hurts, man. That hurts. So what happens is that they generate kind of like very strong defenses that are extremely hard, and then they identify with them, or they pretend that they identify with them. So actually, when you attack a narcissist, or like they perceive your word or feedback or whatever as an attack, what may happen is like either you hit this hard part and it's kind of like chalk that is gonna be destroying you, or you hit this one and it may cause what's called like a narcissistic injury, and then they will get really enraged because it's really, really painful. So it's very important to not be naive, right? Like on MDMA, you will very likely misjudge how hard people are. You will think like, oh, just a honest, earnest conversation will solve the problem, and the answer is like, no. If they actually legitimately in their field of consciousness, they have all of these, very strong, hard architecture. A conversation is not going to do it. The attention field lines will get caught up in there, and they're not going to be able to see what you're talking about or be interested in it. But with MDMA, and it's a little by little process. I have heard one person saying like, MDMA helped narcissism. It might not help sociopathy. We don't know, right? But like, I think it's extremely promising because it will actually kind of like allow the person, again, like with a lot less reactance and fear, to realize, oh my gosh, this is very hard. And actually it is preventing me from seeing things and processing things. One session of MDMA for somebody with a serious personality disorder may not be enough. It will be very painful. They will realize like, oh my God, I've hurt a lot of people. And, but with like more therapy, maybe a couple more sessions, like some genuine progress can actually be made is my guess. Very speculative, but like seriously. And then, if we develop a super MDMA or like a more, kind of like a subtle MDMA, it's something you can take every day with no side effects and sort of like softens you very slowly, maybe over the course of a year, then you're totally fine. You don't have this kind of like very hard, I don't know. We can dream big. But the point is that, hardness and brittleness on MDMA is fascinating because you realize kind of like the illusory nature of the ego, and yet the ego becomes so filled up with love and courage. And that is incredible, right? It's almost kind of like the opposite of these personality disorders, modulo a lot of other factors. I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but there's like something there in the sense that, personality disorder is like the extreme end of low authenticity. MDMA state is kind of the extreme state of like very high authenticity, a lot of self-compassion, a lot of really touching kind of like the deep parts, and doing it so gently and lovingly that they don't break. They soften, they reconfigure in a way that makes them stronger, typically. For the duration of the effect, for sure. And sometimes, if it was a deliberate effect, or even without actually, that kind of like annealed ego structure. Alan Watts talks about how the ego is kind of like a pattern of tension, of musculature, and we identify with it. MDMA is something like that. Like that softens, re-anneals, hopefully in a more Euclidean and regular way. That makes it really strong but wholesome and connected with authenticity, or something like that. Something like that. Okay, so now the next lens here. Okay, this is how I plan these things, right? So like I go point by point, and yeah, I mean it's not like yeah. Anyway, so I was in point 8, and now I need to find point 9, which is emotional processing. So MDMA enhances your capacity for emotional processing in a very intelligent and fascinating way. I don't want to kind of like portray the ability to do very helpful emotional processing in just kind of like one scale and say like where you are, even though it probably does compress, it probably does boil down to that to one factor. But I think of it's more helpful to imagine it as a skill tree where you're like, yeah, finding the ways in which, oh my gosh, here reactance and fear is preventing me from, let's say, contemplate a possibility. Or here reactance made me say something that I regretted, right? So there's like one example. You have kind of this like skill tree. One would be kind of like, okay, how do you deal with the reactance in the context of a loved one, let's say? How do you deal with somebody who is who hates you or something? How do you deal? And like this skill tree, slowly but surely, can be filled up. And MDMA is kind of alone. It's kind of like, okay, look, you actually have all of these capacities because fear and reactancy is so low, where you can actually really play and make the emotions actually resolve themselves through a simultaneous awareness of all of them. So yeah, that is kind of the concept of a skill tree. I would say the same with meditation. It's not like, oh, what level of meditation you are. It's like, no, there's like different things to develop, steadiness of focus, equanimity, tranquility. There's the 7 factors of awakening. There's a lot of kind of like little components, and the flavor of your meditation and the flavor of an MDMA trip actually will have a lot to do with the particular skill tree that you have. What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? And MDMA is kind of like a loan from a very beautiful heaven realm or something. We're like, okay, you actually have all of these skills for 90 minutes. Go. Okay, so the next topic is like the standard conception of MDMA is like serotonin releaser, dopamine releaser, oxytocin, probably down the line, I suppose, endorphins. I mean, I suppose the opioid system is probably very related to the MDMA effects, especially at higher doses, 150 milligrams or to 200. I don't recommend taking anything more than 200 because, potential damage, long-term tolerance, and so on. So this alloy, very pop science, like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, right? Like oxytocin makes you feel very close to others, makes you feel at ease, makes you feel that they're kind of like family, and you can look people in the eye. You can actually buy actual oxytocin nasal spray. I've tried that once, and I did find that it actually enhanced a little bit, kind of like the sense of friendship, intimacy in a MDMA type of way, but only, let's say, kind of like 3 or 4% of the effect size of something like MDMA. So kind of like that combo. We have talked about like high entropy alloys. So it is not like, oh, there's all of these elements, these different filters, and they're just happening together. No, they interact. When you have like kind of this enhanced, cognitive determination and focus from the dopamine and hedonic tone from it as well. And then like the serotonin really lowers your social fear, the fear of being judged or people thinking poorly of you and things like that. And then combine that with oxytocin, which enhances a sense of intimacy and closeness, right? This makes an alloy, right? It's not, and has unique properties. It really is more than the sum of the parts. And MDMA kind of really gets there. I mean, there's like other substances that kind of like really approach it, but they're not there. Like for example, 3-MMC, 4-MMC, there's like that whole class. They're much more dopaminergic and actually much more addictive, and probably, I would not recommend taking them personally because there's so many stories of people saying like, oh, that just got me so close to some kind of release, but it didn't. I mean, it's kind of like edging you sexually. Sorry to bring that topic, but it's something like that. It's like almost, and then the effects subside, And then you do it again and again and again, looking for finding that. Whereas MDMA is like, boom, bullseye. This is it. Sorry, this is it. This is it. It's like this alloy kind of really gets to it, And people like Thomas Ray. Well, he actually believes like imidazoline is essential for MDMA. I'm not sure. Maybe. If that is the case, then a little bit of agmatine may actually have a little bit of an MDMA-like effect. I have tried it, and maybe I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, also like Matthew Baggott is a Tactogen, and I recommend investing and talking to them. I mean, I think they're doing a fantastic job. They're trying to tweak kind of like what is it, dopaminergic, serotonergic, oxytocinergic, and adrenaline and adrenergic is also somewhat adrenergic, like coffee, but not that much. So like what they're trying to find is like, okay, another substance that might have fewer side effects, but still gives you kind of this like profound sense of intimacy. And I don't know if it will work. I mean, like, hopefully. It's also possible that there's ways of kind of like combining various substances to kind of get there. I have heard some pretty interesting phenomenology in particular. And I mean, I don't recommend these because, again, kind of dangerous. But combining GHB and 2CB is very MDMA-like. Okay, why? It's going to be interesting to find that out. And so, yeah, maybe actually, the solution will be something like, some kind of like interesting, very safe combo of something that relaxes you very deeply, something that prevents tolerance to it, hopefully, something somewhat serotonergic, a little bit psychedelic, stimulant, and calming. Maybe all of that also might give you kind of like a taste of the same alloy, and maybe something that you can do more frequently. Let's say once a month or something like that. Maybe not. I mean, 2CB may be cardiotoxic. There's like a lot of complications here. Again, I'm not advocating for you to try any of these things. It's just that, seriously, like if we are serious about trying to extend the effects of MDMA, bring it to the world, exploring things such as like what is going on when you combine 2CB and GHB. It is quite MDMA-like. But what this leads me to is that this combination, this alloy, this state of consciousness, I would say it has kind of this beautiful combination of courage, love, and equanimity. So like, let me talk a little bit about that. So like courage, it's kind of like this, you have the strong ego, which is authentic in the state, connected with kind of this like source and deep field of love. So courage is kind of, this is energized. So you have a solid foundation. You have a solid foundation to act, and you're not afraid to do it. You become very courageous. And so you will be willing to have difficult conversations, even, calling somebody out for bad behavior, hopefully in a skillful way. But that is the sort of thing that MDMA can give you. It can give you the courage to set boundaries with people. It can give you the courage to provide your perspective in a very difficult, unpleasant topic, things like that. Love. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this metronome, this like vibration, which I will say is maybe kind of like 8 hertz or something like that. Depends on the dose. I think it increases in frequency as you increase the dose. But the point is, kind of this like soft, creamy, low pass filter that happens on MDMA. It allows different subcomponents of you essentially to harmonize and resonate with each other and become a unified gestalt. And that process, it's interesting. This is a process. The love is the process. Like once they actually become one gestalt, it's kind of like there's no problem. But it's not necessarily emitting love per se. You still need to energize it. But like the process of harmonization is actually, I think, very related to the phenomenology of love itself. It's a process rather than like a continuous state. You need to be actually undoing some kind of a separation. And that process, I would say, is very loving, and MDMA does that a lot. It can be several hours where like you're just loving because the various parts of yourself are harmonizing. And then equanimity. Equanimity, there's a lot of formulations for it. The one that I like is kind of increasing the stress dissipation capacity. This is how I think of it. I talked about it after my first meditation retreat. Equanimity is kind of a, you're not interfering with the process of stress dissipation. Sorry. And as a consequence, you're kind of like allowing all of your body to use all of its resources to find radiators that will uh, radiate out that stress in the field, and undo, yeah, the topological knots that happen. So, and that alloy, I mean, oh my God, right? If we could be driven by a combination of courage, love, and equanimity, as opposed to fear and reactance, wow. I mean, it sounds so naive, but like, no, I mean, this has to be tried. We've got to get very smart people, in a reality TV show. And no, honestly, and then having very interesting, deep conversations in that state, and analyze what is going on. Why is this so productive? You know, and I do think, yeah, if we find the ways to maintain, something like, yeah, love, courage, and equanimity as kind of like a principle for human connection, a lot of good things could happen. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. A little bit of dessert. Okay, so the next topic. One reason I think MDMA is so profound is because it taps into self-honesty. And self-honesty can be very authentic. It can also be a show. People can say like, "Oh, I'm actually honest with myself." You're not. Things like that. There is a there there. There really is. There is a state of self-honesty, and it can be very unpleasant. But if you approach it with equanimity, it might be something like the discomfort equivalent to a very cold shower, which is not that much. It is unpleasant, okay? Well, it depends on how heavy the trauma is that you're solving, but I think in general, for most people, it will be something like that. Self-honesty is kind of similar in its negative valence as like jumping into a very cold lake and just not habituating to it. Staying cold is good, staying cold. But being there, that coldness with the state of authenticity is good. It's good for us. Abiding in this beautiful, perhaps uncomfortable, very productive state of self-honesty, I think can do so much good. And I don't want to say like, oh, I'm an outlier in self-honesty or something like that. No. I mean, and I do my best. But the level of self-honesty on MDMA is a different thing. It is it is incredible. It's okay. So I think this is related to kind of the vasocomputation from Mike in his recent post. I mean, I do think that we can think potentially of blood as kind of you think of it as kind of like life energy or something like that. May not be blood in the end, but like something quite close to it, or maybe blood is like an important correlate there. Oxygenation, right? So I think that the way in which we're structured and we maintain kind of these defenses is by having a cardiovascular modular organization. Of course, this is completely testable. It would be very, very interesting to give MDMA or 5-MeO-DMT, which I think does the same thing in a much more profound way and general way, but we'll talk about that at another point in time. Even though everything is happening at once. Sorry, I couldn't resist myself from saying that joke. I think that what happens on MDMA is that it is kind of like a search for how to feed life energy to every part of you. And so this modular architecture is kind of like depriving of life energy in many parts of your body, because you're kind of like, well, I can energize this one and this one, but the other ones should be quiet, and you only have these two interacting in a very kind of like context appropriate way. On MDMA, it's kind of this like flawed through all of them. And the boundaries between these clusters that essentially are responsible for energizing particular representations inside you, I think they start bleeding into each other. And so what happens is kind of like similar to tracers. I mean, this would be kind of like maybe a mechanistic explanation of this. So what happens is that this modular architecture breaks down, and all of a sudden, the various phases that you have need to be all together at once. And it can be painful to realize the inconsistencies between these masks, so to speak. So I think this is so important. I mean, again, there might be way healthier ways of doing that. At QRI we have explored some vibration, stroboscopic stimulation, music, and in combination. And yeah. I mean, I think like potentially, like, I mean, and we have like a project in that space. I'll talk about. Will become public later. But the point is, there might be ways, and I think it is physiological. I think if we could actually, have like self honesty as we have like coffee or something like that, you know, deep webs of trust and cooperation, I think, might emerge out of that. Again, they would probably need to, have a container and be protected, but yeah, I mean, a Manhattan Project of Consciousness really would deserve this sort of thing. So it kind of like undoes blockages, right? It's like searching for like, oh, what is deprived? And it holds that kind of like in the arms, in the hands of a very loving energy and feeding it life force. And just everything gets fed. And you go through parts of your system that essentially were keeping lies to yourself. Or you're in denial. Or it's just too painful to think about. Yeah, on MDMA, the blood will circulate in all of those. And then you're kind of like forced to admit the inconsistencies. And it's also very dose dependent. I mean, there is something quite interesting here. I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't have like that much data points here, but I suspect that there's like some doses, like maybe 80 milligrams. It's just not that fun. It does increase kind of this intimacy and closeness, but it just doesn't hit the level of dopamine where like you're like, whoa, okay, ready to help the world or something like that. Like no. Like these lower doses, they may be more about self honesty. They may be more about like, okay, now I see clearly. Let me do some internal work. I think higher doses, they can be much better in the sense that because you feed it also with this beautiful high hedonic tone, and that can also be really healing. But the point is that I think we can kind of like separate the self honesty component from like some of the other quality effects to some extent, which is maybe a lead to kind of like how to generate compounds or techniques, vibration, etc. Again, okay, so we're getting to the close of it. So, geometry. So I've talked a lot about how like DMT causes hyperbolic geometry in your world sheet, which is in the depth map of your visual field, and in other areas of your consciousness, your field of consciousness. But yeah, I mean, DMT, these like very fast, very precise kind of like metronome, makes it so that attention and awareness essentially are constantly kind of like constructing and creating, in some sense, kind of like monstrosities. In this, I mean, if you think of a furniture on DMT, the furniture will start like evolving and you'll become into tubes, and it will turn into other furniture and propagate and maybe turn into an entity, and like so like this very fast, every time this very fast kind of like precise wavefront hits one part, it energizes and creates more. It reifies, it fabricates, right? DMT is like a massive kind of like increase in the fabrication capacity of your field of consciousness. And hyperbolic geometry, very exotic math in terms of the structure of the world sheet. I'm not saying like, oh, you travel to a different realm or something. No, I'm talking about like your own field of consciousness and how that is structured. So on MDMA, that doesn't happen. Maybe on high doses. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. People talk about like MDMA becomes quite different if you, let's say you spend a weekend taking like 700 milligrams of it. I would never do that. Please don't do that. Please. But there is phenomenology that say, actually it can start to become quite psychedelic at those levels. And, kind of like the love and warmth makes that psychedelia just not disconcerting. Whereas, I don't know, mushrooms, I mean, mushrooms are excellent for developing equanimity and being ruthlessly kind of like in touch with all of the unpleasant parts of yourself. Not necessarily the best state to resolve it. I don't know. But the point is that with MDMA, the psychedelia will, be kind of in this wrapper of a very positive hedonic tone. But in general, MDMA is not about this type of structure. It's just like, it's much more of kind of like basic human decency, programs and circuits. But what it does do for geometry is that it creates a very crisp and highly redundant, and I'll explain what I mean by that, depth map and kind of like distance field between the various components of your consciousness. So, LiDAR or like radar, for example, if you have like two wave meters, in a beach, for example, and you're trying to find like where there is a boat, you see how long the waves take to come back, and if you have only two, it's kind of like intersections of two circles. You may actually rule out, well, it's either here or here, but it can't be here because this is inland, for example. So that would be kind of like okay, you barely have enough data to kind of like make a conclusion that it's probably here. What I mean by kind of like a highly redundant, geometry, is if you had like thousands of those, and they're coordinating and they're rendering the scene in a way that like if, a third of them just fall away, it doesn't matter. You will still have the whole distance field, and it will be like really robust. And so geometric operations are, kind of like fuzzy, of course, because of the MDMA, but they're kind of like perceived simultaneously by the whole organism. Again, like maybe this like vibratory currency has something to do with it. And so everything is kind of like really where it is there's no ambiguity, and this connects to, one video and some writing that I have done about like higher dimensions on, let's say DMT. I also, I think like the field of consciousness can acquire higher dimensional properties on DMT, but usually it's more kind of this like crazy fractal fragmentation of the different perspectives, and it's not really like you're in a coherent, simple space. Actually, you may be in a very weird and twisted and irregular, and different parts may actually disagree about like the distance between different components of your experience, and you might experience the ambiguity of that. And the quality of the ambiguity of the distances itself will modify the experience, and it's very complex. MDMA, on the other hand, is like, no, you have like 1,000 raters, and all of them are perceiving clearly. So like, if you solve, a problem or an issue, or you have an insight about yourself, good luck hiding that from yourself. Good luck, because it's just like seen. It's kind of like you're seen by so many things simultaneously in a very, very redundant, highly robust way. And that is fascinating. I mean, again, maybe there's another way of instantiating that effect. It would be lovely. I think computationally very significant. It is not, again, it's not exotic geometry. It's not this, but it is very important, and probably is, the most beautiful place to abide in. You want to be in a place that is really, it feels ontologically solid, but also have like the deep understanding that depends on your way of seeing and the quality and the physics of the field of consciousness. But 3D geometry, very precise, very there on MDMA. Unless you kind of like focus on the fuzziness, and then, well, you may just become a very, a fuzzy cloud of love or something like that. But no, but if you're perceiving a scene, if you're working through a trauma, highly redundant representations. Sorry if I'm repeating myself a little bit. Okay, so the last thing is how gnarly. Gnarly. So, I love it. There's like a new person in Twitter whose handle, I think, is Richie Flow. Richie Flow in math is something that you do to manifolds to simplify them and find interesting things about them. Fascinating. Well, he was saying that my writing, he was saying like, oh, I really like your style of writing. And, to be honest, I just write for the content. I don't really know what style of writing I have. Like, it's not something I really have kind of like cognized. So it's very interesting when somebody has like an opinion. Well, it's fascinating that they actually like it. My style, I don't know. Thank you. But yeah, he was saying like, my style of writing is kind of like very gnarly, not in a bad way. I mean, he enjoys that. I mean, it's kind of like, and this is a computational concept from Rudy Rucker. The point is that, like kind of like when representations actually have like some irreducible complexity to them. For example, like think of prime numbers, right? Like prime numbers are just there, and you can't simplify them. They're like just kind of like one object there. And if you're doing number theory, let's say Ramanujan, oh my gosh, like Ramanujan's mind must have been so incredibly gnarly. Again, not necessarily bad if you have the skill and ability to actually look at these objects and work through them, maybe undo them if they're too unpleasant. But no, mathematicians are collectors of these things, actually. They love to create, oh my God, there's like some irreducible complexity here. This is interesting. There's like some nectar of, whoa, like this is not obvious. and yeah, I mean, I do think my writing is kind of like that. I mean, I only share in videos or in writing things that I genuinely think are new, meaningful, new, like haven't, nobody has talked about it, or just very light, meaningful, like it matters, it's significant somehow, and non-trivial. And the non-trivial part is exactly that. It is a part of, let's find something that has irreducible complexity. Yeah, QRI's thoughts on, how the symmetry theory of valence, interacts with, for example, personality types, or neural annealing, or the topological solution to the boundary problem, or personal identity. All of these things have like very non-trivial interactions. And yeah, what I try to communicate is precisely, yeah, that kind of that interesting, gnarly object of thought. And it's so beautiful when people get it. It's like, oh, you were saying that all of those topics are connected, but it's not a fuzzy connection. There's a precise, interesting intersection there that has explanatory power. And the point is that, that can be good if you're a mathematician, if you're like a philosopher, you're creating stories. You want some of that. The soul likes to delve into gnarly things as long as they're, constructive or helpful. I will also say that like a lot of like kind of like heaven realms, very beautiful things can exist in these like very gnarly configurations. And because consciousness is a field where things can have different kind of like material properties and solidification. Quite literally, I think that we actually represent information we package kind of like patterns of stress and tension and solidity in order to create a set of perspectives that whenever you shine your attention on them, the attention field lines illuminate the non-trivial element there. And yeah, I mean, a mathematician will have lots of those. Is a collector of those, a philosopher as well, and that's beautiful. But let's say like a traumatic experience where it is very difficult to solve, let's say a breakup or whatever it may be, like or something horrible that happened to you. You may be encoding it in a very gnarly way, in this way of defining how gnarly something is. And MDMA will essentially, give you the space and the ability to like look at it very closely, get the insight, and then undo it. Maybe the insight is kind of holographically encoded. I don't know. The point is, it's not gonna be encoded in this like unpleasant pattern of stress and tension anymore. And I think, at the end of the day, if you can find how, the medium of thought, how you're representing information, how you're encoding it, and if we could make that transparent, we would be able to, catalog, the various non-trivial, starting from the simple, kind of like a catalog of knots, for example. We have names for all of the the classic knots, up to a certain, there's like very complex knots, and at some point, like, we lose track of the prime knots, but something like that. I think we can catalog different traumas, not just as kind of like the confluence of factors, but how they interacted to create something like a high entropy alloy with a new set of irreducible properties. And target those in a very, very gentle but like very intelligent way. It's like, oh, you have like type 3A subtype 5 of a gnarly traumatic experience because your internal representations of, let's say, putting an example, your uncle and your cousin doing something bad to you in a particular context where you were trying to achieve a different goal, and that whole thing is this very gnarly thing. And it's not just like, oh, you just weren't loved or something. No, there was like something irreducible and complex there. If we can catalog those, and put them in display, I think that's going to be so beneficial too. Because we will learn how to very efficiently A, use them for computation, and B, be able to dissolve them when they're not serving their purpose anymore. Wow. Okay. I actually thought this would take longer, but thank you so much for listening. And yeah, there's more to come about consciousness and well, there's a couple of big topics I will be addressing soon about conscious computers and how to make them happy, and hopefully how to not create conscious computers that are driven by suffering. This is such a complex topic. We might actually need MDMA in order to have conversations about these at the highest levels, where people can actually influence the direction of this research. Anyway, there's a lot more to come, but thank you so much. I hope you learned something from this, and again, so much gratitude for the community, the people who are interested in these topics. I never thought 15 years ago, that I would ever find kind of like people who are responsive aren't actually interested in this, right? So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'll see you another time to talk about another topic. Infinite bliss, everybody. Ciao.